The hall was alive with celebration. Golden drapes shimmered under warm lights, a string quartet played something elegant and forgettable, and laughter echoed off the marble floors like music in a cathedral. Champagne flutes clinked, polished shoes clicked. Every table was dressed better than I was. It was the kind of event my parents lived for, grand, curated, dripping with tradition and appearances. And then I walked in holding a box. It wasn't much to look at. No ribbons, no glossy paper, just plain brown craft wrapping and a small strip of clear tape holding it shut. No card, no name. Just a box that looked, by all their standards, out of place. Almost disrespectfully so. Heads turned. Not many, but enough. I felt the weight of eyes more than I saw them. My mother spotted me first. She gave me the smile she reserves for when there are people watching, that tight, hostess smile that stretches without warmth. Then she saw the box. Her eyes flickered down to it, paused, and then came back up with a different kind of coldness in them. She approached, slowly, sipping from a crystal flute. "Darling," she said softly, "you didn't bring that as the gift, did you?" I nodded. Her smile twitched. "You couldn't do better than this." Before I could answer, not that I was planning to, my father sauntered over, voice already heavy with bourbon and bravado. "Oh, come on, Elena," he said to my mother. "Don't be too hard on the kid. This is just classic." He pointed at the box like it was a stray dog that had followed me in. "What is it anyway? Origami paper? Or did you write us a poem again?" They both laughed, not too loudly. Just enough to sting. I said nothing. I felt the blood rising to my face, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't going to defend the box. That would give it away too early. And I wasn't going to fight with them. Not tonight. Not when I knew what was inside. Not when I had spent years preparing for this moment. This exact moment. The laughter faded. My mother waved me toward the gift table. "Just leave it there, sweetie. We'll open them later." I walked over to the overflowing mountain of gold and white presents, each wrapped in satin ribbons, each shining like trophies. I gently set my box on the edge, like a piece of driftwood floating up beside a ship. Then I stepped back into the room. The music had resumed. Someone toasted. My parents kissed, posed, and drank in the attention. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the plain box sat unnoticed, unwanted, unloved, but not for long. Because once the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, that little box would be opened, and everything would change. I hadn't made it 3 steps away from the gift table before I heard her voice again. "You've always been the ungrateful one." It was a whisper, but it cut through the music like a blade. I didn't need to turn around to know she was speaking to my father. She said it in that hushed, performative tone, the kind that made it look like she didn't want to be overheard, even though she absolutely did. "Ungrateful," she repeated, more to herself this time. "Can you imagine bringing that to our anniversary?" I could feel the burn behind my eyes, but I forced myself to stay still, to breathe. My fists clenched for a moment before I remembered I wasn't here to argue. I was here to reveal. Across the room, someone tapped a glass with a knife and called for a toast. People rose. I stayed seated, silent, hands in my lap like a child in a pew. That box, that little brown box, still sat on the edge of the gift table like a forgotten secret. I glanced at it once, briefly. And just as quickly, I looked away. My father raised his glass, swaying slightly. 30 years, he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. 30 years with this incredible woman. 3 kids, 3 houses, and at least 3 nervous breakdowns. Laughter, all rehearsed. But I'd do it all again, and I know she would too. He raised his glass toward her. She beamed. The audience clapped. Then his gaze slid lazily toward me. "And to our children, especially this one," he said, raising his brow, still figuring things out, but always creative, always unexpected. That word lingered. Unexpected. "The same way you say it when a car crashes through your living room," he laughed. A few others chuckled along politely, unsure whether it was a jab or a joke. It wasn't the first time he'd used a celebration to disguise his barbs. It wouldn't be the last. Flashbulbs went off, glasses clinked. The moment passed, but my pulse didn't slow. My mother sat back down beside him and muttered something else I couldn't hear, but her tone was clear. That gift had embarrassed her, and my presence had only made it worse. "You've always been the ungrateful one." It wasn't the first time she'd said it. I had heard it whispered after holidays where I'd made something by hand instead of buying from a catalog, or when I forgot to post some extravagant birthday message on social media, as if love had to be branded and shared to be real. In our family, tradition wasn't sacred. Image was. A pearl necklace, a framed photograph with just enough filters, a gift receipt with 3 digits before the decimal. Those were the love languages I had always failed to speak. But what they didn't know, what they hadn't even begun to suspect, was that this little box they scoffed at would unravel the very fabric of that image. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, out of truth. I glanced at them again. They laughed with old friends, their smiles full and effortless, oblivious to the weight that hovered just a few feet away. Not from me, from the letter. The one I'd folded 100 times. The one I'd rewritten, burned, rewritten again. The one that would make them rethink everything they thought they knew about me and about themselves. And so I stayed quiet, not out of guilt, but out of purpose. I drifted through the party like a ghost in silk. No one seemed to notice the tightness in my jaw or the way I kept glancing toward the gift table, where the plain brown box sat like an abandoned orphan. The room, on the other hand, pulsed with chatter and champagne. Everyone was too busy savoring shrimp cocktails and repeating polite lies to see that something beneath the surface was shifting. I smiled at an aunt I barely remembered and nodded at an old family friend who called me by the wrong name. "All grown up," she said, squeezing my wrist like it was still 2007. "Still artsy, I bet. You were always the sensitive one." I nodded again. The word sensitive clung to me like something unwanted. It always had. At a table near the center, my brother Mark threw his arm around our father and told some half-funny story about their fishing trip last summer. Everyone laughed, the kind of collective, effortless laugh that makes you feel like an outsider, even if you're standing right there. He glanced over and raised a glass toward me, eyebrows lifted in mock toast. I gave him a small smile, one that said, "Not now." He winked, as if to say always now. Mark never knew when to take things seriously. It was his charm. And his curse. My cousin Eva, the only one in the room who ever seemed to read my silences, came up beside me with a curious look. Her dress shimmered in the light, but her expression was soft, concerned. "You okay?" she asked, voice low. I nodded, then shook my head. She followed my gaze to the gift table. "That's yours, isn't it? The brown one?" I didn't answer. Eva leaned in. "They said something earlier. Harsh." I didn't like the way they talked about it. I shrugged, keeping my voice even. "It's not for them to like. It's for them to understand." Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she wanted to ask more. But she didn't press. She just reached out, gave my hand a quick squeeze and whispered, "You always did things differently. They'll see it someday." I hope so. But not tonight. Tonight wasn't about hope. It was about revelation. The music swelled as another toast rose. Someone danced with someone else's wife. A young niece twirled barefoot through the crowd, her laughter trailing behind like fairy dust. It was all so lovely, so picturesque, so choreographed. And through it all, I waited. Not for the applause, not for their praise, but for the moment when the room would go quiet, the plates would be cleared and the masks would finally come off. I had built this moment carefully, not out of malice, but necessity. Because everything I had left unsaid for the past 5 years, everything I had buried beneath quiet obedience and shallow smiles, was sitting in that box, waiting, unnoticed, unopened, and undeniably powerful. Every tick of the clock, every clink of silverware brought us closer to that unveiling. And still, they laughed. Still, they judged. Still, they had no idea what was coming. The party wound down the way all grand evenings do, with forced smiles stretched a little too thin, half-empty glasses abandoned on every surface, and guests pretending they weren't eager to leave. Laughter mellowed into murmurs. The band played one final sentimental tune. Someone tripped on a floral arrangement and turned it into a joke no one would remember tomorrow. And just like that, the crowd thinned to nothing. The lights dimmed. The air changed. The pageantry was over. What remained was a hollow hush, that vulnerable silence that only follows performance. I watched from the corner of the room as the last guest shuffled out with a glossy gift bag in hand. My parents stood by the door, waving goodbye like royalty bidding farewell to their subjects. My mother's lipstick had faded at the corners. My father's bow tie had been tugged loose. They looked tired. Happy tired, the way people do after a long night of receiving praise and pretending they didn't crave it. When the door clicked shut behind the final guest, my mother exhaled loudly and kicked off her heels with a grunt. "God, my feet," she groaned, collapsing onto the nearest couch. My father laughed, loosening his collar. "Still think a ballroom was a good idea?" She rolled her eyes but smiled. 30 years. We deserve something big. 30 years, he echoed, pouring himself one last drink from a half-full decanter. And all the kids showed up, even the creative one. I didn't flinch. I stood quietly near the back wall, hands clasped, waiting. "Speaking of," my mother said, glancing toward the gift table, "what did you say they gave us? That plain-looking one?" My father followed her gaze. "It's still there." They walked toward it slowly, as if approaching something suspicious. A trap. A challenge. It sat in the same place I had left it. Still unbothered. Still unwrapped. It looked so small compared to the gold-flecked towers of boxes beside it, like a whisper among shouts. My father picked it up and turned it over in his hands. No name. No wrapping. No envelope. Just brown paper. My mother scoffed. Probably something artistic. He peeled away the tape, a slow, skeptical motion. The paper gave easily, soft and soundless. Inside, there was no trinket. No keepsake, just a letter. He stared at it, then passed it to her. "A letter?" she said. "That's it?" But something in her voice had changed. Just slightly. The way it tightens when the ground shifts beneath you, and you don't yet know why. She unfolded it. Her brow furrowed. My father peered over her shoulder. For a few seconds there was nothing. No sound. No movement. Then her breath caught. A subtle gasp. The kind that isn't loud but cuts through silence like thunder. He frowned. "What is it?" She didn't answer. She just kept reading. His smile faded. He reached for the page. Read the first line. Then the next. He sat down without a word, glass still in hand but forgotten. Something was shifting. The letter had begun its work. I stepped back into the shadow of the hall, watching. Their expressions were unraveling, piece by piece. Confusion giving way to recognition. Recognition slowly tipping into something darker. Something heavier. It had begun. The moment I'd waited for wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, human, real, no applause, no dramatics, just a truth too large to ignore. The box was open. And now, so were their eyes. My mother's fingers trembled slightly as she held the page, but she refused to acknowledge it. Her lips moved soundlessly, reading the words over and over, as if repetition would soften the meaning. My father sat beside her, still staring at the first few lines with furrowed brows, the ice in his untouched drink slowly melting against the glass. They didn't speak. Not at first. I watched them from the hallway, just outside the glow of the chandelier, where the shadows gave me cover. A part of me felt like an intruder, not into their space, but into their carefully constructed illusion. And yet, I belonged to that silence. I had waited for it, built it, filled it with all the words I hadn't been brave enough to say aloud. My father finally cleared his throat, but the sound came out ragged. He leaned forward and squinted at the letter in my mother's hand. "Read it again," he said, almost in a whisper. She did. The first line. October 17th, 2019. The night I disappeared for 7 hours, and you never asked where I went. Her hand instinctively rose to cover her mouth, and for a brief second I saw something rare in her face. Fear. My father blinked. That was when we had that dinner with the Walkers, wasn't it? She nodded slowly. You came in late, she said, eyes scanning the page. You looked like you hadn't slept. And I told you I had a migraine, I murmured under my breath, though they couldn't hear me. You nodded, told me to go to my room, and poured yourselves another glass of wine. The letter continued. I could see their eyes jumping down the page, registering memory after memory like landmines. They were quiet explosions, not loud, but devastating in their precision. My mother's face grew paler as she reached the second paragraph. I could imagine where they were now, reading about that night when I had found the test results. Not mine, someone else's. Someone they thought would never come back to haunt them. I remembered the feel of that envelope in my hand, the one I found tucked between old photo albums. The name, the date, the lie that had rippled through our family without ever being acknowledged. I watched as my mother leaned back into the couch, letter still clutched in her hand like it might bite her. Her expression was hollow now, not angry, not sad, just vacant, like a vase that had been knocked over and drained. My father stared straight ahead, as if the room had grown unfamiliar. He rubbed his forehead and whispered, "Why didn't they say anything back then? Why now?" As if the timing was the problem, not the truth. I stepped forward slightly, just into the edge of the light. I didn't say a word. I wanted them to sit with the letter a little longer. To sit with me, the version of me they never asked about, never looked for beneath the surface. Because that single line, that date they had long forgotten, was the fracture point. The beginning of a truth so heavy it had taken me years to lift it off my chest and lay it on paper. They thought they knew everything about their child, but the first line of that letter proved otherwise. They didn't speak for a long time after that. My mother kept the letter in her lap, but she didn't touch it again. My father just stared ahead, one hand gripping the edge of the coffee table like it might keep him grounded. Neither of them could ask the question they were thinking. What else don't we know? They were about to find out. Because that letter was not a confession, it was a chronicle. Of nights spent awake. Of birthdays missed, not out of indifference, but necessity. Of smiles that were forced, so no one would ask what was wrong. Of long walks home in the cold after working 2 jobs and still pretending I was fine. They read, I never told you about the second job I took at the campus hospital, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want you to worry. I worked the overnight shift 3 times a week. That's why I missed Dad's birthday dinner. That's why I was too tired to come home for Christmas in 2020. You thought I was being selfish. But I was saving up for someone else, for someone you never talk about anymore. My mother's hand flinched. When Aunt Mel was diagnosed, I knew you wouldn't help. You said it yourselves. She made her own mess, but she was family, and she didn't have anyone else. I paid for her treatment until the end. I held her hand in hospice when no one else came. I used my savings, I used my time, and I used the last ounce of energy I had to keep that from you, because I knew you wouldn't understand. The words hovered in the room like smoke from a long dormant fire. I leaned against the wall and let myself remember it all. The smell of antiseptic, the sound of beeping monitors, the sharp, hollow coughs of dying patients echoing down hospital corridors. The nights I walked back to my apartment through falling snow with red eyes and empty pockets. The guilt I swallowed when I saw my friends post selfies from ski trips and concerts while I rationed instant noodles just to afford cab fare to the clinic. And through it all, I never said a word to them, because I knew how they viewed sacrifice as foolish, unnecessary, a failure to protect yourself. They called it dramatic when someone gave too much. They would have told me I was wasting my youth, that it wasn't my responsibility. But it was, because no one else was going to do it. And so I carried it. Every phone call from the billing department, every bad prognosis, every sigh Aunt Mel made when she told me she didn't want to die alone. I carried all of it so they wouldn't have to. But now they knew. I watched my father pinch the bridge of his nose, his voice gravelly and quiet. I didn't know. No, I said, finally stepping into the room. You never asked. And that was the thing, wasn't it? They never asked where I went, never asked why I was tired, never asked what I needed. Because in their world, love looked like gifts and appearances. But in mine, it looked like showing up, even when no one noticed. My mother sat frozen, one hand still resting over the letter, like she could stop the truth from bleeding further by holding it down. My father was leaning forward now, elbows on knees, shoulders hunched under a weight that hadn't fully dropped yet. They thought they were reading about sacrifice. But they hadn't reached the part that mattered most. I saw the moment they arrived there, when both of them suddenly stopped reading and just stared at the page like it had turned to glass, fragile and damning. My mother's lips parted. My father's breath caught in his throat. I wasn't supposed to find the adoption file. It was shoved in the back of your old filing cabinet, behind a folder labeled renovation receipts. I wasn't looking for secrets. I was looking for a phone charger. My voice came out flat as I stepped farther into the room. I didn't want to make it easier for them. I didn't want to offer comfort before they earned the truth. I wasn't angry when I read it. Not at first. I was just numb. I kept rereading the name, the date, my birth name, my biological mother's name. It felt like holding a mirror that didn't show my face. They didn't look at me. They couldn't. You could have told me. You should have told me. I would have understood. But instead you built an entire life on the assumption that I would never go digging, that I would never ask questions you weren't ready to answer. My father finally found his voice. It was complicated. I looked at him sharply. No, it was dishonest. My mother stood abruptly, as if her body couldn't handle being still any longer. We were going to tell you, eventually, but you were happy. You had a good childhood. We didn't want to ruin that with details. Details. That was what I had been reduced to. A truth edited for convenience. A life trimmed down to fit their narrative. I took another step forward, speaking now not just from the letter but from the part of me that had remained silent for years. You don't get to decide what parts of my life I'm allowed to know. That wasn't protection. That was control. My mother's face contorted. Part guilt, part pride. You were loved. I never said I wasn't, I replied quietly. But love without honesty isn't trust. It's performance. She flinched. My father looked down at the floor like it might open up and swallow him. I continued. For years I thought I was just different, detached. I didn't look like either of you. I didn't act like Mark or Sarah, and every time I asked where I got my stubbornness or my moodiness, you'd laugh and say it was from your side of the family. But it wasn't, was it? They couldn't answer. The room was too full of things they had tried too hard to bury. I wasn't angry when I found out I was adopted. I was angry that you didn't trust me enough to handle it, that you thought your silence was better than my truth. I let the words hang, let them sting, let them settle. Because in that moment, everything changed. They no longer held the version of me they had built in their minds. The grateful, eccentric child who stayed quiet when told, who played the role they wrote for me. Now they were facing the real me, the one who had been living behind that lie, waiting to be seen. The letter had done what I never could with words alone. It had cracked something open, not just between us, but within them. All their practiced composure, all their pride, all the stories they told themselves about being good parents, it was unraveling before my eyes. My father was still seated, hands clasped tightly between his knees. He hadn't spoken since I stopped reading. His gaze flickered now and then toward me, as if he wanted to meet my eyes but couldn't hold them. My mother stood across from us, arms folded across her chest like she was bracing against a storm, though it had already hit. And then, without warning, she crumbled. Her shoulders sagged, her lip trembled, her eyes, defiant for so long, softened into something I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. I thought we were protecting you, she whispered, her voice breaking. We didn't mean to. We didn't mean to hurt you. The apology didn't land the way she hoped. It hovered in the air, suspended between what she meant and what I had lived through. You hurt me because you meant well, I said, my voice steady, not cruel, because you thought your comfort mattered more than my truth. Tears welled in her eyes now, freely. She sat beside my father, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand like a child caught crying. I didn't know how to explain it, she said. You were so small, and then we waited too long. And then we were afraid, so we pretended it didn't matter. It did matter, I said softly. It mattered every time I looked in the mirror and wondered why I didn't belong. It mattered when I overheard people whispering how different I was from Mark and Sarah. It mattered when you told me I was dramatic, too sensitive, always offbeat, like I was some failed copy. My father finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. Why didn't you tell us you knew? I blinked at him. I did, I said, not with words, but I tried. You just didn't want to hear it. I remembered the time I asked about baby photos, why there were only a few, and none from the hospital. I remembered the time I made a family tree in 3rd grade, and my mother insisted I use their version, not mine. I remembered the way my father stiffened every time I asked if I looked like anyone in the family. All those signs, brushed off, minimized, redirected. You kept waiting for me to forget the questions, I said, but I never did. My mother reached for my hand then, gently, like she thought I might pull away. I let her take it. Her grip was warm, fragile. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked up at me. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't say, it's okay, because it wasn't. But I also didn't let go, because in that moment, something passed between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of recognition, the beginning of something real. She finally saw me, not the child they wanted, not the story they told, but me. Complex, flawed, furious, loving. The child they had always had, but never truly known. The silence after my mother's apology was thick, not awkward but reverent, like something sacred had just been said aloud for the first time, and the air itself was holding its breath. But there was still one part of the letter they hadn't read, the final page. I could see it still folded beneath the first, crisp, untouched, waiting like the last domino in a careful line, the one that would bring everything crashing down. My father reached for it hesitantly. His hands were rougher than I remembered, slower, less sure. He unfolded the paper and began to read aloud, voice low, almost afraid to raise it past a whisper. To afford this party, you refinanced the lake house. You told us proudly, like it was a sacrifice worth making. And I smiled. I even nodded. But what I didn't say that night, he paused, swallowed, was that I had already paid off the debt you never knew about. I paid the tax lien that nearly cost you the property. Quietly, carefully. I used the money I'd saved over 4 years, money meant for my graduate school. My mother's hand shot to her mouth again. No, she whispered. No, that can't be. I had planned to apply last year. I was accepted. But I didn't go. I couldn't afford it after covering what you owed. And I didn't tell you because I knew if I did, you wouldn't accept it. You would have called it unnecessary, foolish. You would have made it about pride. My father looked at me then, truly looked at me. And I saw it, the moment his understanding turned to grief. The celebration they had thrown so lavishly, the one they were so proud of, the string quartet, the catering, the champagne fountain, it had all been built, unknowingly, on my quiet, costly sacrifice. You toasted 30 years of love tonight, the letter read, and I stood there with a boxed letter and a silent heart, watching you both celebrate something you never once asked if I was part of. Tears welled in my father's eyes, but he didn't let them fall. He just placed the letter down gently on the table like it might crumble in his hands. Why didn't you tell us? He asked again, but softer this time. Not accusatory, just aching. I took a breath. Because I didn't want the apology, I said. I didn't want you to say sorry for the money or the silence or the lies. I just wanted you to see me, for once. Not for what I gave you, but for what I lost in the process. My mother was crying openly now. Her mascara had bled down her cheeks. She didn't even try to wipe it away. We didn't know, she said. I know, I replied. That's the problem. I turned to leave then, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. The final blow had been delivered. Not to punish, but to expose. Because sometimes the deepest heartbreak isn't caused by betrayal or absence. It's caused by loving someone so completely that you erase yourself for them, and they never even notice. The hallway outside my childhood bedroom hadn't changed much over the years. Same creaky floorboard near the third tile. Same picture of us in matching holiday sweaters from 15 years ago. A photo we'd never bothered to update. Even the scent was familiar. Lavender, wood polish, and the faintest hint of something floral that lingered in the carpet like memory. I had closed the door behind me gently, not slamming it, not storming away. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt in the same way. I was simply tired. For the first time in years, I had said everything I needed to say, and maybe for the first time, they had actually listened. I sat on the edge of the bed, the worn comforter bunched beneath me, staring at the string of fairy lights I'd once hung during high school. Half of them had gone dark, but I didn't mind. The room felt honest that way, partly lit, partly shadowed. A quiet knock interrupted the stillness. I didn't answer, but the door creaked open anyway. My mother stood there, her face bare. No makeup, no smile, no mask. Her eyes were red, but not swollen. She looked younger in that moment than I'd ever seen her, like the weight of holding up perfection had finally been set down. My father hovered just behind her, one hand on the doorframe. He looked like a man who had walked through a battlefield and only now realized where the wounds had come from. They stepped in together, slowly, carefully, no words. They sat beside me, one on each side, like they used to when I was sick as a child. Back then, they'd stroke my back and tell me everything was going to be okay. Tonight, they didn't offer promises. They didn't try to explain. They didn't beg for forgiveness. They just sat. For the first time, their silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like presence. My mother reached for my hand again. I let her take it, this time with no hesitation. My father placed something gently on my lap. The letter. Folded, worn, sacred, now in a way none of us could name. Then he did something I'd never seen him do. He lowered his head, not out of defeat, but humility, the kind that comes when a person finally sees the cost of their comfort and realizes who paid for it. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because, for once, I didn't need to. There was nothing left to explain, nothing left to prove. The real gift had never been what was inside that box. Not the paper, not the letter, not even the truth. The real gift was this: that for the first time in my life I was seen. Not as the quiet one, not the artistic one, not the ungrateful child or the misunderstood sibling. Just me. And in that silence, heavy with everything we'd finally acknowledged, I felt it. The faintest beginning of healing. Not loud, not immediate, but real. Unspoken. And that was enough.